Hey everyone, it's Sadesh Girdhari. I'm part of the VMware Cloud Stream, and today I have with me John Fiskus. And John and I have worked together prior when I was at Lumen Technologies, and really excited because today we're really talking about how teams can grow and improve themselves, and we'll have a bit of banter about that, and then we're going to get into a little bit of some of the news. And just once again, really excited about our discussion today. John, would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and thanks for having me. Excited to talk to you. I always enjoy our fun conversations. So I'm John Fiskus. I've been in the technology business for 20 plus years. But the first thing I say is I'm a dad and I'm a husband. That's really who I am. And the way I've organized my life is I love to serve other people. So being someone in the technology business, that's led me towards helping companies navigate the complexities of transforming their infrastructure to get to a place they want to be. And right now I work with a company called Lumen Technologies, as you and I both work together. And what I do there is really just, again, help executives and technology teams to see where they are and where they want to go, and then help them cross that gap. And love doing it and have a blast helping people do that.
Nice. And one of the reasons that we are focusing this month on kind of growth in our roles for cloud, multi-cloud, data center, premise and edge infrastructure, all the stuff that we have to deal with, is because this month, July 30th, is sysadmin day, and we're over here at VMware Cloud. We're celebrating all month with a bunch of events, right? So we're really excited. And I think what's kind of interesting is, like, I think back to the sysadmin that had the most impact on my life. And John, undergraduate for me was the University of Georgia, go Bulldogs. And I remember the green screen that I had to go sign up for classes on. And I know that somewhere there's a sysadmin that was responsible for running the mainframe, making sure that it all kind of got together and worked out. And I think what's interesting is, as we think about the team members that we support for our customers and the growth in career path for them, I think it's really interesting to kind of think through how they go about growing their careers, what they do to grow their careers, and what those different paths look like, because technology is always changing and always shifting. So I think, I had the pleasure working with you before, and I remember you telling me this story about career growth and achievement, where you helped an organization not only kind of realize a whole new business goal and business unit, but also help someone personally grow. And I was wondering if you would kind of share that with our viewers today, because I think it'd be a great way for us to sort of connect and understand.
Awesome. No, yeah. So again, you hit it right on my passion. I love watching people grow, because as much as I would like to take the credit for this gentleman changing his life, he really did it on his own. He took advantage of an opportunity. And this was a company that was in growth mode. So they were changing the way they managed their infrastructure, private cloud and some public cloud infrastructure. So they were dealing with a hybrid environment. Leadership at that company had got to a point where they realized we don't need the same skills that we used to. We're not going to need to hire more system admins, but we need folks that can help us navigate this process. And they need that system admin background. So there was one guy in particular, just a great guy. And his job, he was a Unix admin, and he basically didn't have any range of influence beyond that. But leadership saw something in him, and he really is an amazing guy. But he was at a point in his life where I think he was caught in a rut, right? Just kind of doing the same thing over and over. He would admit this. He was overweight at the time and just kind of not doing much. Well, leadership offered him a chance to take on a role to interact with us as a provider that would basically get rid of the need for day-to-day services that as they grew. So he rolled up into that role, and it changed his life. Like, he embraced the change, and he went from sitting behind a keyboard all the time to now interacting, directing teams. He then began to work out. He now regularly hikes the Appalachian Trail and does 15 to 20-mile hikes. He's lost over 100 pounds. It's just amazing. And oh, by the way, he's managing large teams at global organizations now. So it's really cool to see someone that embraced that opportunity and the way it impacted his life. It's just, I'm inspired by him, and I'm just glad. And I'm happy to say that when we first met, it was 10 plus years ago. And now we're still friends and we have a blast, talking about life. But yeah, so that would be my example of somebody that I was just so amazed. He embraced the change, and that changed everything.
So that's, I think what's interesting about that is the way you describe the change. It was not only a change in role, it was an orientation in the way that he viewed his kind of life. And I think it's interesting because a lot of times in technical roles, we view technology change as the reason that we change our career. When a lot of times, what I heard in your conversation was, it is the business dynamics of what's needed to service the business that really changes our technology careers. And I think it's really challenging because a lot of times, I don't know, like anyone else, we kind of put our heads down. We're like, hey, we put all the pieces together, everything's working great. And then the business comes to us and says, yeah, we're going to need it 10 times cheaper and 30 times faster than what you've put together. And you step back and you're like, well, I don't know that I've ever thought about doing that. Like, I've never thought about how do you get the control and the value that the business wants mixed in with all my platforms, right? I structured this thing to run for the next 60 years, with the team that I have. I didn't think about, well, the entire business environment has changed around me. And I look at that in a couple of ways because, we're coming out of COVID, everybody's getting out and, getting about, and, I'm excited about that. But there's a whole way of doing business that has changed too, right? We know that e-commerce greatly increased, right? So I would expect that business demands for e-commerce and for technology teams will change to elevate folks that need to kind of provide those services. And then I think the other thing that's really interesting about that story as well is that as you think about the inputs for technology and how the value relates to business, it's also like, how do you advocate for those things, right? Which of those things, hey, it's fine to abstract this storage subsystem away, but let's not give up our network capability. And I think that's kind of one of those more interesting things. We also have a question here that I'm going to pop up on the screen. It says, how to cope with business demands that you mentioned in a real manner. And I think there's a couple of things here because I like this question a lot. I think that the first thing I always want to ask, and I'm sure, John, you've gone through this. I'd love to hear your thoughts, but what is the business measuring? What are the actual things that they're measuring, right? Is it how quickly you can release software, or is it how much availability you have for that particular service that may be customer facing? And what's been your experience there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say the big thing that as a server of leaders that have to meet these business outcomes, the big focus that we typically talk about is, first of all, what's our target, right? So like I said, what are you measuring? What's your target? And from there, we're working back because there's always a gap, right? We've got a gap that we need to clear. So what is that chasm? And then what are those solutions that we need to get through that chasm? So I would say, first of all, we focus on the end result. And then from there, we back into those technologies, whether it's faster sprints or new technologies or whatever the case may be. It's starting from the outcome and then aligning your individual sub outcomes within technology, no matter what that platform is. And then it's obviously having the smart people in the room. So having the folks that understand current technology, as well as some folks that can brainstorm on how we can leverage that and cross the gap into newer technologies. So I'd say that's the biggest thing is being able to talk the language of business outcomes, but then understanding the way those underlying technologies get you there. And that's where, when we think about system admins and folks that know the technology, when you can speak to that language, it's incredible. In fact, I was leading a panel of CIOs recently, and one of the CIOs basically asked the other CIOs, how did you get here, right? How did you go from where you were and why did you get here? And the consistent thing was most of them started off coding or front end admins, and over time they were given an opportunity and they began to learn the language of business and the language of outcome. And ultimately, that's where the change happened for them to be able to lead these organizations. And it's funny, with the one CIO that asked the question, he says, I'm still, I think he used the term, I'm still a techno geek at heart, right? He's like, I still love the idea of coding, and I still enjoy that. But he's like, now I get to see how I can impact more people. So yeah, so that would be my thoughts on on what I've seen and what I've heard.
Yeah, and we actually had another great comment here, and I like this one as well, from Zia, and it is sometimes it's not technology but culture, and I think that's actually a really insightful comment, because I know, for instance, we have both worked at companies that are guilty of organizing the structure around the products and services that we provide. And it's really challenging both for customers and for employees of these companies, because what happens is that it's an organization that's built on the product design, right? And often, as businesses change, customers demand integrated product designs. They don't want to hear about network, storage, and compute. They want to hear about the unified platform that takes care of the problem. And that's
Right.
I think that's an example of a challenge that you have to face. And I'd be interested on your view. Cultural change, in my opinion, it starts both at the bottom and the top. But what's been your perspective as you've dealt with these large customers in the Southeast, in your role, and I think nationwide as well? Yeah.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And that's a great comment. And it's 100% true, right? People can say one thing and continue to
Mm-hmm.
do something different. And just because you say you want to do something never means it's going to actually happen, right? So I think that the comment is spot on. The two comments I have on that is, ultimately, like you said, culture change starts at the top and is implemented, in the end user, middle management, all that, right? So, but that change has got to be led from the top and has to be demonstrated consistently from the top. So I get the comment, right? That's not always going to lead us in a place of success just because you say you're changing culture. Conversely to that, I would say that ultimately it's always our ability to lead where we are, right? So it may be cliche, but it's do the things you want others to do or the others to see. And if you want to impact change, you impact the world you can impact. And if you have great impact,
Right.
then ultimately that impact expands. It's just the law of giving, essentially. If you continue to give and help, you can have great impact. I know it's not always going to change the world, all right? But and the other side of that is, if you don't see success from that, then you get to a point of, am I in the right place? Just being candid, right? Is this the right place for me? Because am I going the same direction as the company? But ultimately, I think your comment and the comment on the question, or on the write up, was 100%. Culture is a massive difference, and we all need to be aligned with our cultures, and we want to see that in our leaders. But lead where you are. That's my answer.
Yeah, I like that. And I feel like a lot of times, as someone who's in an engineering role or an operations role or a development role, you get impacted by those technology decisions first, right? You feel the pain of, hey, these two platforms aren't interoperable. I'm going to try to write a script to make this thing work, right? And then essentially that becomes what I call the toil of IT, right? You're now responsible for creating that script, maintaining that script, and that script, anytime it breaks, you're challenged with it, right? And I think in a way you have to bring up those types of things and say, listen, it's not value add for us to do this. It's not going to create more flexibility for us, because essentially what I did is I fixed a pothole, and what we really need to do is repave the street. And then, how do I get that discussion started? How do I up-level that discussion to my leadership team and say, hey, listen, I could spend my hour fixing 20 potholes, or I could start helping, design and build new streets so that we can move faster. And I feel like that's one of the things that's really, a challenge, especially today, because these cloud service providers are releasing new services on such fast and high pace, and they don't always make sense for the business operations that organizations have. So there's always this, hey, is this something rational, or is this something just neat and shiny and new, that you're kind of talking about? And I think what's interesting, I'm sharing this URL, is that This this URL was written back in 2020 by Kit Colbert about the career path that some of these administrators have and what some of those decisions and steps are overall. And so I just put that up on the screen for a minute there.
That's great. Can I talk about VMware Cloud Foundation for 1 sec? Because I have experience with a client impacting folks. So I had folks, they were on an old infrastructure. They had a huge challenge in the way that changes took place. And they were averaging, to make a change in their environment, it was taking 7 to 10 steps just to make a change, and the time frame associated with that. And we actually helped them implement vCloud Foundation, and their folks learned how to use that platform, which then gave them a wide range of additional skill sets and capabilities that have since added their capabilities into the hyperscaler clouds, right? Because of VMware's capabilities. But they went from 7 to 10 steps to 3 steps to make a change, from days to minutes. And that outcome allowed them to move much more quickly. So to your point, it's the idea of, if we embrace these things, now those folks, they've helped their own career in addition to helping the company get to a place where they could release more software more effectively.
Yeah, and what I really enjoy about that is that it talks about the platform decisions. And a lot of times, I feel like we, especially in sales and marketing roles, we get a lot of flack from architecture. We put up the slide, everybody's like, oh, that's beautiful. And we like these boxes and the colors of those boxes, and then someone has to go implement it. And I think that what's really interesting is that when you start getting good at, I'm just going to call it platform operations, and then later service delivery and service design, right? These overall factors for what we call the cloud operating model, and I use like air quotes when I'm doing that. It's interesting. You start thinking about things like, oh, when we implement stuff, will this make the business have more flexibility to deploy new services, or will this lessen the flexibility? And then I think the other area there that's somewhat challenging is you start thinking about, well, should I compose these things together? Should a storage system be related to, data processing or information retrieval? And you start to think about those services as an ecosystem that support the business outcomes that you're really driving towards. So I'm going to switch gears just a little bit, because I know we only have about like 10 minutes left, and talk about a couple of things that I caught in the news. And to me, this is the best part of streaming, is that you can get this discussion started earlier and more often. And so the first thing that I caught in the news is The Economist has released a piece called "Do the cost of cloud outweigh the benefits?" And I'm just going to high level summarize this, and it's this age-old question around what's valuable for your business. And I think it's interesting, because a lot of times in our roles, we're dealing with organizations that have existing data center footprints and or premise-based infrastructure, and they're starting to think about, how do I get more value from my investment, or how do I move my investment to a cloud service provider or a hyperscaler and understand the relative business benefit to me as well as the technology benefit. And as I skim the article, it is behind a paywall, so it really kind of got down to the brass tacks of, there is as you increase your cloud consumption, there is an overall cost of business that you have to factor in that may or may not be beneficial. And this goes to a lot of the things that we as IT professionals know, where hey, it's sometimes much cheaper to leave a server always on as long as it's in your data center versus in your cloud, right? Like those types of things. And I'd be interested what your thoughts are on that that line of thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing that all over the place, right? We're seeing people taking workloads that have been in the cloud and they're moving them back because of cost or culture. Going back to the culture question, that's a big issue, right? So the other side is we're seeing workloads moving between clouds, right? Whether it's because of capabilities in clouds or the associated cost structure to run in a different cloud. So 100%, what I've seen over the past 5-6 years is, there's been an excitement of cloud first, right? And then you get to cloud and you go, holy cow, this is so expensive, right? Cloud, we all know cloud is is only cost effective when you can turn it off, right? You want to be fast, you want to be innovative, you want to be nimble, you want all these things, and you leverage cloud for that. But the rule is not every workload belongs in the cloud, right? Maybe your private cloud, if you want to call that your cloud. But I think you're right. I think the more we move pieces within our environment, the more things can break. So if you're turning things up, turning them down, that may be great for a specific application workload, but it may not be for all. So to your, I think you said it well. I think the economist said it well. I am seeing and we've heard this term before, the repatriation of workloads. And actually
Right.
people have been talking about it for a couple of years, but we're actually starting to see it now. So it's really interesting. And I think what's happening is the pendulum swung really hard one way, and now it's kind of eased a little bit. Not to say the hyperscalers aren't growing tremendously still today, but the distribution of workloads are definitely spreading across internal and external. So I think it does come down to is how does it impact your business? And to the point, going back further, is when we evaluate new technologies, especially if you're an individual contributor role, or if you're first line, second line management, the more we can connect whatever your ideas are, the more we can connect to that ultimate outcome. And the more you can get business focused around ROI and business benefits and potential, the results or reduction of risk. A little known fact, the reason why executives make decisions 9 times out of 10 is to reduce risk. That's, that's for the kids at home. So yeah, if you can speak in that language, they'll listen to you about your ideas.
I like that because that's something we haven't talked about yet on the cast here. Is that a lot of times teams are extremely risk adverse, and I mean, think about it. If you're responsible for running a multi-million-dollar business, and you're talking about making changes to the systems that support, let's just call it the financial transactions for my example, you're not going to want to hop into something new. You're going to want to kind of factor that changeover, test it a couple thousand times, and then think about, hey, as we scale this transaction load, does our cost increase or does it stay stable for running the service, right? And then I think the other thing, I'm working on a couple of blog pieces around you think about risk is the risk going to be an external risk, right? Do the customer see it? Or is the risk going to be an internal risk? Does everyone inside of the organization see it, right? Because those are kind of the two flashlights that get shined a lot as you think about that. Now, as I was reading on the internets as well, there was another thing that I read about, back to the importance of sysadmins. I don't know. There's a big kerfuffle about IBM's transition to their new email system, and once again, as I said, sysadmin month here, and I feel like this is a perfect story for why sysadmins are important. I just wanted to share it with you, and that's for the last 18 months, IBM apparently they sold off Lotus Notes, so cheer for that. I don't know who bought it, but they built an internal system to run their email, and they've just had countless challenges with this transition to a new email system. And I think the last 4 or 5 days, their employees have had to have some experiences without email. And sometimes we pray for that in the roles that we're in, but I think doing business means that your email gets there in a timely manner. I mean, I think what it illustrates is the complexity of making those technology choices and how to ensure availability, another big factor in risk, while you're making those transitions, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that was an interesting news article that I'd read. And then there's one other one that I wanted to kind of bring up, and that's this whole change for work from home. And so I don't know what your experience has been like. I remember Lumen being a fairly distributed organization and spread out, but I know that some organizations, in the article that I was reading, it was Apple talking about, hey, we're going to mandate a culture of come into the office. This is actually part, in my opinion, of cultural change that has to happen at organizations. And I think it's critical for not only sysadmins, but engineering, ops, IT, and dev to understand what the culture change means for distributed teams. And, I'm curious, I work on a distributed team. We're spread out all over the United States, many different time zones. And my experience has been, we've had to increase communication around Slack, like Slack, Teams, all of that stuff is the bedrock of like understanding what's happening, how we're going to react, and being able to quickly communicate using those platforms. And then we still have to keep up with this formal email system, right? Where you got all the folks that are still doing those emails. So I think there's some challenges there as organizations adapt and change to we call it the future of work here. I'd be curious, what's your experience been, and how do you see organizations coming back together? And I know pretty soon you're going to be on premise with customers in that role as well.
Well, I'm happy to say we're actually already having face-to-face meetings with clients. So we're seeing a major shift to people wanting to look each other in the eye, and not digitally, but in person. So there's something to be said for that presence, right? So interestingly enough, though, as much as people are wanting to be together, the Apples of the world, and get people into a place of collaboration, over the past year, give you an example, one CIO that I was speaking with recently, he's changed his mind on the way that his team can operate remotely. And what that's done for him is it's completely changed his mind on where he needs to hire people. He's got some roles that, we're based here in Atlanta, and he's got some roles that historically he would say this role has to be based in Atlanta. Well, now he's opened it up essentially across the country. So it's changed his ability to find folks that are perfect for the job. So yeah, that culture, I think we are going to see people back in the office, and they are opening up again, but it has, and I know it has changed a lot of folks' perspectives on where someone has to be located.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. I'm joining today from Utah, and so shout out to all the folks out in Utah. But I think that it's interesting as leaders learn how to manage those distributed teams, and as teams learn how to work in a distributed manner. You can't just walk over and say, hey, where's the LUN for this particular server? And I think the other thing that's interesting is that a lot of the conversations that happen on Zoom now are the replacements for the conversations that would happen in person. I'm also kind of curious about what your view is on organizations that have to do more technical work together. And have you had any organizations that have had to like collaborate on a design, and how have they gotten around that, like the whiteboard process? Because it used to be that we would all get in a room and we would go to the whiteboard and we'd say, okay, here's the bits and the bytes, and they need to go from here to there, and it takes too much time, and also it's billions and billions of gigabytes that need to move quickly. Like, fix this, and how do we do that? I've seen some folks be very active with kind of like those online programs that they're using to design, et cetera, et cetera. Have you seen anything interesting or any cool ways to solve that problem?
I would say, just the generic collaboration tools without getting into specific name brands or anything. But I have seen people learn how to use the tools they have, whether it's, I'll just name the top ones, whether it's Zoom or Teams or whatever the case may be, right? People have learned, and I think that's what it comes down to it. How do you make the most of the tool sets you have? Because you may not be in the position to impact a new tool. Most of these tools have all these capabilities, and it just takes adoption of those capabilities. That's the biggest change I've seen over the past year, is as people said, well, I guess we're going to be remote now. How do we be more effective? I've seen people embrace it and then begin to use it. Everyone on this conference right now knows that there's a lot of tools. What's the number? It's got to be less than like 80% of functionalities used in your average collaboration suite, right? There's just most people aren't using everything. So as adoption has improved, I've seen a lot more collaboration improvement as well. Now, conversely to that, I've also seen meeting fatigue. And I don't know if you've seen this too. Right? It's ridiculous, right? How many meetings are we standing up and people are or scheduling full half an hour meetings when a 15-minute stand up would work, right? So I'm also seeing people mature in their process around that. Just to if you are remote and if you are collaborating, how do you do that more effectively and not waste your time? Because you can't walk to somebody's cube when you're 2 states away, right? So how do you do that?
That's exactly right. Yeah, and we've seen that too. We've instituted kind of like, they need to be 25-minute meetings, that kind of stuff. But I did want to switch gears. So one of the other things that was really important, and going back to career growth, right? How do we grow our careers as you think about them? Was mentorship and leadership and coaching. And the reason I wanted to talk about that was I know that you've definitely had some experience having great mentors. I started off my career at Scientific Atlanta, and I had an amazing mentor who helped me find my path, right? So that I wasn't just going to be a SharePoint administrator, with nothing wrong with that, but for my entire career, right? Like he helped me through that process and helped me understand those higher order of things that I needed to sort of get to and achieve. I'm curious because you're now kind of doing that as a project for yourself, as a passion project. I'd like to understand what your thoughts are around that, and as you're helping folks grow, what you notice, what you think might help others.
Yeah, thanks for allowing me to talk about that, because if you were to ask me at work right now, what am I most passionate about? What am I most excited about? It really is helping others that are trying to decide what their career is going to look like, right? And how do they want to do what they want to get to? I would say that the role of a mentor, to me, one of the biggest things is helping people through the evaluation of process of where do they want to be, right? How often do we step back and say, where are we headed? So, so to your point, I've developed a kind of a 90-day program where I'm helping folks that are earlier in their career to evaluate where they are and where they're headed. The first thing I have them do is I have them write their career obituary. So they they decide, what does it look like in the end, right? And that allows you to think about, okay, well, if I want to be there, what are my things? And this is a practice people have done for mentoring in personal life as well. Like, what do you want the end of your life to look like? It's a good practice to do. But so that's the first thing we do, is where do I want to be at whatever period of timeline that I've got, and then we build a process around how am I going to get there? What are the things that really the activities and things that I need to do to get there? And I'm fortunate because I've had people invest in me that have done that for me. And I meet with IT leadership and business leadership a lot. And the one thing I've seen consistently are the folks that are what I would call just great leaders, or in Good to Great, they call them level 5 leaders, right? That the folks that really are change makers, they love to give back, and they love to help folks earlier in their career, decide where they're headed. So I'd say that's the big thing, is to find yourself a mentor, number one. Make sure you're aligned with that mentor, and don't do it just because they're in a power position. Do it because you connect, because when you connect, it makes a huge difference at a personal level. And then even if you don't have a mentor, write your career obituary and see where you're headed, and that may even help you decide where you're going. But it's a huge passion. I love at my point in my career, I love seeing folks that want to invest in themselves. And ultimately, what I've said is, I'm doing this. I work at Lumen, but I'm doing this for them as an individual and their family, because someone has done it for me. So I'm paying back, and there's nothing that makes me happier at work right now is to watch other folks just blossom, right, and gain more confidence in themselves. So
that's
thanks
awesome.
for asking about that.
Yeah, I think what I look at and I take away from that is if you're in a role that's a junior role, or if you're trying to figure out what your next step is as part of your career process, I really I call it backwards design, right? And a lot of times when I'm having trouble figuring out a problem, I'll just write it down, and I'll say, okay, so if this is the best outcome that I could have with this problem, let me kind of map backwards and figure out how it might work. And then I think the other important key there is that finding folks that help mentor where you want to go or want to be is key. And I'm curious, how do you help folks find those people? Like, are you thinking that a lot of times that just involves asking folks in your network, or is it sometimes finding a leader in the organization and talking to them, like what's the nugget that you would take away from sort of that challenge, right? Because a lot of times I'm like, oh well, I'm just responsible for data storage here, but one day I want to be responsible for application delivery, right? Like I think that's the coolest thing. What how do I like climb that ladder or get up to the top of that mountain? What's your recommendation?
It's a great question, and I accentuate question because
Yeah.
have you ever noticed the people in the room that ask good questions, and how you turn your head and you realize, wow, like we've had a couple of great questions today. Those are
Yes.
insightful and make you think. So my recommendation is ask questions. Think about the questions that you would ask someone that would influence you, that you would want to learn from, and start
Oh
asking,
yeah.
have 2 or 3 questions and start asking those to people that you think might be a good mentor. And based on their
Ah.
responses, then
Feeling.
it gives you the chance to evaluate, okay, is there alignment here? Is there something insightful here? And then what you'll find when you ask smart questions or thoughtful questions, people are drawn to you. And oh, by the way, don't forget to listen to the answer, right? So
Yeah.
ask the
Yeah.
question
Active
and
listening.
active listening. And then when you do that, the folks that you're asking the questions to, they'll be drawn to you because they'll see interest, especially the ones that would make great potential mentors. Because when you ask them questions, they love to think about, okay, how could we do things, whatever, different, better, all that. So that would be, if I were going to focus on one thing, it's have a couple
Yeah.
questions that you'll ask people that you think might be a good mentor. And once you get a dialogue started with them, then that turns into a relationship. Then it gets to a point where you say, I really enjoy our conversations. I would love it if we could spend time and and you don't even have to call it mentoring, just some guidance conversations, right? Whatever you want to call it is fine. Some people think the
Yeah.
mentoring is too complicated or it's too much of a title on
List.
it. In any
Yeah.
case, that would be my main thing. Would ask the questions and you'll find the people.
Hey, John, thank you so much for joining today. Believe it or not, we've gone like 8 or 9 minutes over. I'm going to click end broadcast. Hey, team, thank you for watching, and I appreciate all the interaction on the comments. And we will definitely see you next week. Next week, we're going to be talking about the move from system administrator all the way through the senior SE path. And of course, multi-cloud in between, right? Because there's a lot there. And can't wait to have you back. So take care, everybody. Stay safe on the internet. And thanks again.
Awesome.